Welcome back to another episode of Deep CONfessionals, where hosts Simone Herlihy and Tyler Bailey will take you on a journey into the minds of history's most elaborate cons, exploring the fascinating intersection between deception and faith. Join us as we unravel the motives behind some of the world's most notorious scams and con men.
On May 21, there's going to be a terrific earthquake, way greater than anything that the earth has ever experienced. And that'll be the beginning of Judgment Day.
The end is near.
1994 will be the last day of the final tribulation period.
I'm ready to shoot myself or go on a booze trip. Am I on cocaine? I am not the CEO. I'm a servant of God working here, and God is the CEO. We look to him all the time.
I had plans after I retired, but I put them all aside. I feel as if I've been drafted.
6 o'clock.
In 3 minutes. If it does not happen, what will that mean?
I wouldn't entertain that question.
You're confident.
That's what I read in the Bible.
I was totally convinced, totally convicted of it, but I was wrong. I have sinned.
Hi, I'm Tyler.
And I'm Simone.
And on today's episode of Deep CONfessionals, we will be investigating the story of Harold Camping and the chaos of the May 21st, 2011 Rapture, which he predicted using math. Now, Harold Camping was a prominent Christian figure with popular TV show Open Forum with Harold Camping, so very popular televangelist back in the early 2010s and before then. The show was hosted by his company Family Radio, which Camping was the CEO of, which he founded in 1959. There were two other chairmen who worked with Camping to keep him in check, but passed before 2010, which gave him full reign. And at that point, he was getting pretty old, so with nobody else to check him, he was getting kind of, I guess, unwieldy with his decision making. So Family Radio was funded through things like merch, ads, sponsors, and more things, but was mainly funded through his donations. So people were watching the shows, sending him money, donating to him to keep it running. And as a result of that, his media empire was worth over $70 million in 2010. And his message went out to over 200 radio stations across the country and some others around the world, drawing in millions of listeners. In late 2010, a movement of religious believers of the Rapture predicted by Camping took to the streets warning people of his upcoming rapture, which that was a movement started by Camping from him putting out a book in 1994 where he falsely predicted the rapture on how it was going to happen, and then in 2010 or 2011 he did the same thing, essentially trying to predict the rapture once again using a very, let's say, out of the sorts method of going about it.
And what did he do to try to predict the rapture?
So he looked through all the scientific data he could find, such as carbon-14 dating, potassium-argon dating, and then he looked through the scriptures to try to predict, the absurdity of it. So basically, it went like this: Jesus died on April 1st, 33 AD. Take the year 2011. So why 2011? There is no reason why. He didn't give a reason why it had to be 2011. It's just the current year that it was at the time, and I guess he just didn't think that part, so he just kind of skipped over that. But basically, you take 2011 divided by 33, which gives you 1,978 years. So then you take that number 1978 times 365.2422, which is the true length of a year, and then you get 722,449. So, I mean, there's no real good answer as to why he's making some of these decisions on, like, the math that he's using. He's just kind of doing it at this point.
He's really intuitive with it.
Yes. So, jumping off from that, he goes from the atonement equals 5, completeness equals 10, and then heaven equals 17. It's never really explained what he meant by that. What any of those numbers have to do with any of these. I couldn't really find where. So again, a lot of his explanation for this wasn't really articulated pretty well by him. He's just kind of doing things. But if you multiply all those... What was that?
And along with all of those numbers that you get to equal out May 21st, 2011, isn't the science behind it also that it would create like an earthquake potentially that like flooded the land or whatever? And that's also somehow included within the math?
Yeah, I was getting to that. But, so anyway, you multiply all those numbers together, and it gets to 850. So you take 850 and square it. Why do you square it? I don't know. But you get 722,500. And you subtract the previous number by the new number, and you get 51 days. So you add 51 days off of April 1st, 2011, which would have been the anniversary of Jesus dying, and you get the new date of May 21st, 2011. And that is his prediction on when the rapture will start. You know, brilliant methodology on how he was going to really decipher when the rapture was going to occur. But effectively, what was going to happen to the rapture, if you want to go over that?
Yeah, so the rapture essentially is the end of the world, a doomsday, as a lot of people call it. And it's what Camping said would happen when the end of the world came, and God would save 200 million people, like approximately good people, and all the rest would be left behind. These good people would ascend into heaven and would remain safe, while all the rest of the sinners would be sucked up into the earth from the flooding that occurred. And he said that the rapture would happen at 6 p.m., earthquakes would ensue all throughout the world, starting on Christmas Island, funny enough, and then they'd make their way everywhere, killing people with tsunamis. It's funny because also with the rapture that Camping predicted, a lot of other Christian subgroups were not in favor of this at all either, but it gained so much popularity with the media that it had, that people were extremely dedicated to spreading the message of the rapture, and it became one of the most expensive advertising events ever, with spending over $100 million on billboards, signs, and other things like RVs to travel around the world with the message spread across them. His followers were the ones that spread the message too, but mainly by using fear-mongering, and telling people that they need to be scared, that they need to change their ways of life, and that goes into the whole televangelism aspect of it too. Obviously the rapture didn't happen, so people were confused, but that's essentially how it happened.
Yeah, I just loved like the a few things over that was just like the 200 million saved, despite there being like over 2 billion Christians on earth. I just think that's so funny that like the 10% savior rate was just such a Like, that's such a really hard, like, low number. It's such a hard one to get into. Like, it kind of reminds me of, like, that Kirk Cameron movie of where, like, the rapture happened, and then it's just, most of the movie is just, like, kind of offensive because of just how, essentially, he just glossed over a lot of people who were just, like, blatantly did not deserve Armageddon to be placed upon them. It was just, like, really, I don't know, it's just a really funny one. And also just, like, the earthquakes thing at 6 p.m. And if you're a real nerd and you know how, like, tsunamis work, they can go at, like, 500 miles an hour in fucking open ocean, which is just absurdly fast, and you could definitely cover a time zone in, like, an hour, I think. So I think it's funny if, like, they're just waiting at the time zone, like, line at just, like, 5:59, just checking their watch, and then whenever 6 p.m. strikes, it's just all over it.
I never thought about the time zone aspect of it all. That's actually so funny.
It's just really goofy. Like, he actually specified that it's 6 p.m. for, like, relative to each time zone. That's why it's, like, it matters like that, because it's just such a goofy, like, train of thought, because you know he didn't think about it like that, but it's just, like, visualizing it is so funny.
All of the people just waiting outside for the potential rapture that obviously didn't happen.
Yeah. And so whenever, so we could talk about essentially the day of the rapture. So, like, for instance, or some of the people who are affected leading up to the rapture, and then we'll get into the some of the things that were also leading up to the rapture. Actually, let's start off with Operation Rapture, the social media event that started on May 19th.
Yeah, so Operation Rapture, it happened a few days leading up to the actual rapture that camping predicted. But it was weird because it was really like almost a social media campaign to make these events go viral in order to publicize the actual rapture that was supposed to happen on May 21st. So people started essentially on May 19th this Operation Rapture. And there's examples of people throwing their clothes out onto the sidewalk to make it look like they already ascended into heaven. There's another event that was called the pre-rapture orgy because everyone was going to die. So they're like, screw it, let's all go to the streets. Another event.
I love that one.
Yeah, that one's funny.
I love the idea that the pre-rapture orgy didn't work because they didn't have a specific, like, address to go to. It just said the streets of America, and it had, like, over 7,000 people enlisted on saying they were going.
I know, it's so funny, especially because the streets, just anyone, anywhere, anyone come to this pre-rapture orgy. But, like, another one that was really insane was an event that was put on by the Phenomenauts, which was like a sci-fi band that was prominent back in the 2000s, and they had a mass movement of filling up blow-up sex dolls and tying them to helium-filled balloons and ascending them into the sky, essentially to promote the rapture, which was supposed to happen a couple of days later. And obviously these events went viral on social media and publicized the event even more. So, yeah.
And then also the people profiting off of it, like profiting off of the lead up to the rapture, such as like the pet insurance stuff. So if you die and sadly God doesn't take your dog with you, so you're gonna have to hire somebody to come take care of your dog after you die. That's what it, and they're still around today. There's still plenty of websites where somebody's just like, I mean, obviously they're taking advantage of, like, people who are in their sort of their Ruby Ridge phase of their life, where they're just like convinced that the rapture is heading up now, and then they're just going to be like, well, I need to protect my dog. I need to protect Lassie, so I'm gonna go ahead and, buy this insurance or have somebody come take care of my dog for me after I go. And then it's obviously just a waste of money at that point.
It's continued fear mongering again. Like, there's so much fear mongering that's involved, especially with televangelism in general. But yeah, it's continued.
And those are the people taking advantage of the fear mongering. But off of that, let's go over some of the people who were affected as the subsequent rapture on the May 21st, 2011 prediction, such as Robert Fitzpatrick, who was probably the most famous of the bunch of people who were affected. So Robert Fitzpatrick was like a former official who worked for the government, and he essentially was preparing for retirement, and he heard of camping's prediction put all over billboards and stuff, and he thought, well, if the rapture is coming, I might as well participate in spreading the message. He spent almost all of his life savings to put up billboards. He essentially just wore like a bunch of merchandise, and then he would go out in the street preaching about it, telling people about how the rapture was coming. And then the big buildup was on the day of the rapture. He was in Times Square in New York, where a bunch of news crews and a huge mob of people were surrounding him and, essentially just harassing him, telling him that he's stupid and all that, being real mean about it. And essentially he's just sitting there as confident as can be, because he's just like, well, I can't wait for 6 p.m. to come around because I'm going to prove all of you wrong. And then, so whenever 6 p.m. comes around and nothing happened, it was just really sad, awkward moment to see. As you can see, just metaphorically, you get to see his soul leave his body, because he's just so defeated. He talks about having to go back home and do the dishes that he planned on not coming back to do, so he just left them in the sink. So that was pretty tough.
As happy as I feel like everyone should be, too, that they're not dying, I feel like everyone was a little disappointed, especially the uber religious.
Yeah, I think people wanted to see the chaos unfold in a way, to just be like, holy shit, the guy was right, it's fucking Armageddon. Like, what are we gonna do? But also, just because of just like how it turned out for him specifically, I think people were just like, oh, kind of wanted the rapture to happen to, make him feel better about it or whatever. It was really, really sad thing to see.
But out of all the televangelists, I do feel like he's like one of the more likable ones. And not that I like him in any sort of way, but like compared to Kenneth Copeland, perhaps, he just was a lot less sinister. He may have even fell for it himself.
I think he just got old and just started making a lot of bad decisions. And especially going into his next prediction. But anyway, a lot of families were messed up by this whole thing, because a lot of people were really convinced it was going to happen. Some people quit their jobs, some people quit school, some people were about to have kids that they never thought that they were going to see, and some people toured the country looking at all the pretty sights before the end of days type of thing. A lot of people got pretty messed up afterwards. But so essentially, the day of the rapture, what Camping was doing was that he stayed at home. He stayed at home and just quietly, collected his thoughts on it. And then the following Sunday, he didn't show up for service. He closed his open forum, and then but when he returned the next week, the next Sunday, he had a new prediction that the real rapture was going to take place, and the justification that he made was you take May 21st, 2011, then look at the book of John, passage 21:11, where it says Jesus' disciples caught 153 fish. Now, it is an allegory in the book, it's in that scripture, but what he misinterpreted as interpreting the scripture as 153 days of judgment after the rapture, which didn't happen on May 21st, but camping went along with it anyway. Again, I think it's even in his logic, like once again, in his logic, he's skipping over things. The rapture was supposed to happen on May 21st. It didn't happen, okay? So the new rapture is supposed to happen. But in this one, this is predicting how long Armageddon or Judgment is going to be after the rapture itself, but it didn't happen. So he's predicting the end date and somehow was like, he's predicting when the rapture was going to happen, and somehow he fucked it up and made it his own end date, which was so goofy. But anyway, you take May 21st plus 153 days, it equals October 21st, 2011. And that's when he pronounced that's when the actual rapture was going to happen.
And mind you that this is his third rapture that he's predicted.
Yeah, I think he'll get it right this time.
For sure.
I think he's on to something. Yeah. Do you want to go over the last part?
Yeah. So finally, when camping started to get a little older and the raptures had failed, he started to slow down his show, and the viewership went down. And once that massive failure had occurred, he was asked if he would dissolve the company. And he said, "I'm not the CEO. I'm a servant of God." And I think that is a really telling quote, especially for a lot of priests. Like, it's self-serving for him.
Also emphasize the way that he says it. He was like, "I am not the CEO." Just like,
I am a servant of God.
The way that he said it. God is the CEO. That's
something else.
Yeah, way to deflect responsibility. It was so funny. Like, that's such a blasphemous thing to say.
Right, and he was the CEO, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Like, it's just a lie also. And after that, shortly after that, which is funny enough, he had a stroke, and he survived it and did go back to work. But funny enough, October 16th, which is 5 days before the rapture, he said that nobody could actually know when it would be, and he ended up retiring.
Yeah, well, he's just cutting it. Well, he's not committing to it then. What if it did happen on October 21st? Then he would look silly.
It would look very, very silly. So, he decided to cut that off before it could even bite him in the ass again.
The reason why he said that, though, was because of the religious groups from earlier that disagreed with it or just flat out denied that anyone could know that, is because in almost like every sect of Christianity, predicting the rapture is a sin because no man can know that. So that's what he finally, kind of just came to terms on that, was just like, yeah, I don't think anybody could know it.
Yeah, and after that, it was pretty much downhill from there, unfortunately. He passed away in 2018 after falling down the stairs at his home at 92 years old. He also confessed a lot of his sins before his death, which is part of the reason why I said he's maybe one of the less sinister televangelist pastors we've seen. And continue.
Yeah, he's it just says a lot about his character and just like how he was able to own up for a lot of his mistakes, especially just after doing all this wrong. Like, a guy like Kenneth Copeland, you'll never get him to do that. A guy like Elijah Regalado, you'll never hear him do that. They're just constantly deflecting blame. I think this guy was just getting way too old, and so his age was kind of taking over. His brain just wasn't functioning as much as it used to, so making a lot of radical decisions. He was also isolated from the company as, like, you know, being the head honcho. So that kind of affected his, you know, somebody not being there to stop him from making these decisions.
Yeah, and basically in conclusion, his company, Family Radio, it still exists, but they distance themselves from camping, and they make way, way, way less money. Like, I'm talking, they went from 3-digit million to 1-digit million, and that a lot of the reason is their operating costs were like $26 million, and obviously they can't still support that with the amount of income they're making now. And they downscaled with that, and their reputation is pretty much, you know, they can't really come back from it, I should say. And they took down all of camping's archives too, so you can't even listen to him anymore.
Yeah, pretty sad. I would like to hear all the other bangers he had. Maybe he was like the Christian Alex Jones. Really would have gotten to like the. But yeah, what are your final thoughts on Harold Camping?
I think that he is a pretty gross human being and kind of misused resources, but I think that he, to some extent, was at least aware of what he was doing and knew what he was doing was wrong and isn't living in this delusional world where he thinks that this is for the greater good. And then he ended up confessing before his death. So I think that out of all the guys, at least he took some accountability. So it's pretty awful what he did, but out of all of these guys I've heard of, he's just kind of seems old.
Yeah. I often thought about like whether or not if he did all this intentionally to try to profit off of it, but just hearing some of the stories of him coming to terms with it after the fact, and it was just like, oh, you know, maybe I'm just not where I should be in life right now. I'm just gonna, you know, push this all away. So I mean, I still respect that, but yeah, he did a lot of, dare I say, just blasphemous things. He did push some blame on the God, like in some like indirect ways. It was just kind of, but again, he's super old. I think that's just what it comes down to.
I totally agree.
So, yeah, so I think that'll do it for this episode of Deep CONfessionals. This is episode 3, I believe. So
thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Deep CONfessionals. Remember to stay vigilant, stay curious, and join us next time as we uncover more secrets from the con men of the world. Until then, keep your eyes open and your skepticism sharp. See you next week.